All right, today we're going to talk about the cardiovascular system and the purpose behind that cardiovascular system. Now, when looking at it, there are a few main things we're going to look at. The primary organ that we're going to see in this unit is going to be the heart. The main job of that heart is to work and pump the nutrients throughout the entire body. Now, in terms of those nutrients, what nutrients is it pumping it and what is it pumping it through? That corresponds to then of the vascular system, which is going to include the vessels. Now, those vessels are going to be the arteries, which always go away, the capillaries, where there are going to be two different gases being exchanged. Those two different gases are CO2 and oxygen, and then the last one being the veins. And the veins always go towards that of the heart. Okay. Now, the basic function of that cardiovascular system is vital because what does it do? It supplies oxygen and nutrients. We just got done with the digestive system talking about the purpose of the nutrients. We get all those nutrients, we can convert those nutrients into energy sources, but what needs them? Every single cell. And being that every single cell needs those nutrients, it needs to have some sort of a pumping mechanism to get those nutrients to the entire body. That's where the heart comes in. Okay. Not only is it going to help pump nutrients and supply the oxygen it needs from the respiratory system, which we'll talk about here shortly, but it also removes the waste. In the muscular system, we talked about during anaerobic respiration. When we're sprinting, when we're doing exercise, we build up a product called lactic acid due to the inability to use oxygen, in particular the mitochondria using the oxygen, to make energy. We can make it, we can mean energy, but without oxygen, but the waste product is lactic acid, and the only way to get rid of it is to pee it out. So the filtration of blood through that of the kidneys helps us also to remove those wastes. All right, now moving our way into the structure of the heart. Heart itself is a hollowed-out organ that is going to be found within inside the thoracic cavity. Remember that thoracic cavity being within the chest. The size and location, if you hold up your guys' fist, if you take a look at it, that fist is about the average size of an adult's heart. Now, it's going to lie in an area behind that of the sternum. We call that the mediastinum. You'll see that in one of your homework assignments today that you'll look at. That mediastinum is that area within inside the thoracic cavity, right behind the sternum, and it's going to be medial to the lung. So if you remember going back to this description, here's your heart. You're going to have a lung on this side, and then you have a lung on this side. Okay? All right, moving our way along, taking a look at this heart. Now, if you were to remove all the vasculature and the vessels and the adipose tissue up there, you could kind of see your real crude-looking Valentine's Day heart within there. If we separate that Valentine's Day heart out, you're really going to have 4 different chambers. You remember that from your sophomore biology year we talked about. We have chamber 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we'll talk about those chambers. We'll name those chambers here shortly. All right. Before we get there, we're going to start taking a look at the coverings of the heart. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky. The pericardium actually is going to correspond to many different things. I'm going to try to ease your pain here and just talk about the one pericardium, the fibrous or the parietal pericardium. Parietal is referring to the outermost cavity area. When you dissected out the cats, you took a look at the parietal pericardium. That was the outer sac that the heart laid in. Now, we can look at the visceral pericardium. The visceral pericardium is different. This is actually on the heart itself. On the heart itself. So we can give that a different name. We call that the epicardium. Now, there's going to be a space between those, and that's when you looked at the heart dissection on the cat. You cut that pericardium open, that parietal pericardium open, and there was maybe even some liquid, some fluid within there. So you have your pericardium on the outside, and then there's going to be that cavity in between. And then you work your way into your epi. The reason I'm starting to draw these out is because you will actually see this as your first diagrams on your test. Okay, looking at again the different layers of the heart. Now, as we continue our layers of the heart, this at least shows you an illustration of that. So this peeled back layer there, that is referring to as the pericardium. In between there might have been some serous fluid, some liquid in between there, and underneath that is actually the epicardium, the outer side of the heart. So now if I look at our distinct layers of the heart, so this is where we're going to see our diagram. Not only do we have, remember again, our peri, and then we have our cavity, we're now onto the epi, which is the outer side of the heart that's going to correspond and contain capillaries and coronary arteries. Coronary arteries are going to contain oxygenated blood. They're going to feed the heart. These guys are vital in terms of giving the heart the oxygen they need to make ATP so they can continue to pump blood. If these guys get blocked, you have now what's called a myocardial infarction, or a common term is a heart attack. These are the ones that are awfully small that can get clogged up with cholesterol. And so we got to be very, very careful about that. The middle layer of the heart is the thickest of those layers of the heart, and that is the myocardium, myo muscle. And then remember, it is a cardiac muscle, so it's involuntary, being controlled by your hypothalamus, your teller, and your medulla oblongata, your doer, sending out that electrical response to continue your pacemaker within the heart. And the last of the inner layer is going to be the endocardium. So if I go all the way back up, and the endocardium quickly is the inner layer of like the ventricles and the atriums you'll see shortly. We're going to go back up and put them in order. So we have epi, myo, and then endo. Okay, so that's our order. And so the next slide should show you an illustration of that. This guy is going to be your diagram. Take a look at that. But you will have to label the pericardial cavity. The parietal pericardium, again, is your structure. I'm just going to get rid of parietal and I'll also get rid of fibrous. We'll just name that one as pericardium. The visceral pericardium, we again said that is the organ. We'll name that as the epicardium. Myo muscle, remember the thick muscle layer there, and the endo is the inner inside layer. Moving away to the heart chambers and the valves, it does contain 4 different internal chambers. Now these 4 internal chambers are going to be essential in terms of being able to keep the blood separated for optimal efficiency. Now you saw in a frog's heart when you probably did the dissection in 7th grade that they have those 3 chambers of hearts. So if we looked at a 3-chambered heart, we have 1, 2, and 3. Both oxygenated and deoxygenated blood can mix in this bottom chamber. That's not very efficient. So if I get rid of that and I go back to now an efficient heart where I have separated out 1, 2, 3, and 4 chambers by this thing in the middle, it's called the septum. And I also have different valves, one on this side and one on that side, you'll see here shortly. Now the 2 top chambers are going to be called the atrias. Those are the 2 chambers that are going to be found on the top of the heart. The 2 bottom chambers are these ventricles. Now the job of the ventricle is to actually pump blood throughout the entire body, where the job of the atriums are to receive blood. Quick illustration, here's diagram number 2 on your test. You should be able to label these guys. Okay, going through and labeling all the parts. We're going to come back to this illustration here in a second, so talking about the chordae tendineae as well as the different atriums. One of the quick things I want to take a look at, a quick peek at though, is look at the myocardium. Myo, remember, is muscle. Look at the myocardium on this side versus the myocardium on that side. Now, if this was in your thoracic cavity, remember that just next to it you're going to have a lung on this side and a lung on this side, and pumping the blood to it is going to be coming from this chamber. Now taking a look at this chamber again, you have the muscle within that right hand side. Remember, this is going to be the right, this will be the left, because if I transposition this onto your body, this is going to be flipped around. So the right versus the left hand side. This right side only has to pump blood through here and go to the lungs. Not a very far distance in comparison to this left side that's going to pump it through the aorta all the way up to the head or down the subabdominal artery all the way down to the toes. Okay? So we mentioned already the septum. The septum is going to help keep the right and the left side of the heart separated out. So if I'm just going to do a quick heart diagram again, we have our separation point. Right in the middle here, this line I'm drawing there is the septum. That keeps the right side separated out from the left side. Now we get into these AV valves. AV refers to atrium, the atrium's on the top, and the ventricles on the bottom. Atriums, ventricle. What you're going to have on the right side, you're going to have it's called a tricuspid valve. So 3 little valves on the right, and on the left you're going to have a bicuspid valve. Remember that these are atriums and ventricles. That's what's going to help separate them out. And you're going to see here in a second these chordae tendineae. Now, the purpose of the chordae tendineae, let's go back to a slide here we did just recently. Look at those guys there. The chordae tendineae are those heartstrings. Now what's going to happen, this little valve has got two little valves. Blood is going to pool inside here, and as blood pools inside there, let's see if I can get a different color. What's going to happen is that blood is going to work its way down into this chamber. Now, as it works its way down to that chamber, that's fine, but we don't want blood to go back up. If blood went back up into that chamber, it's not going to do us any good. So these strings help hold that valve closed after the blood went through. It's kind of like an umbrella. So as the blood can go down, pool down around it, but as it tries to go back up, it can't. Now, if it's not closing correctly, what you can end up having is what's called a heart murmur. So sometimes you could end up having that. But what we want to see happen is that blood is eventually going to go work out through this blue tube. And you see it over on this side through that tube there. One of the last things we're going to talk about real quickly before we finish with this video is just looking at the connection of those chordae tendineae, and they're held together by the papillary muscles. And again, they prevent that backflow. So if we're going back down to the bottom down here, there's those papillary muscles that hold onto the heartstrings, those chordae tendineae. So now back at it, we're going to see that backflow being prevented because again, we don't want to see a heart murmur. Where we stop right now, we'll stop right at this point. We'll move our way and start talking about the differences in some of those vessels here shortly.